The mercantile door slammed open with such force that every head in Fort Worth, Texas, turned toward Fiona Langley, whose copper-red hair caught the harsh afternoon sun like wildfire against the pale blue sky of 1878. She carried her basket with trembling hands, her freckled cheeks burning not from the August heat but from the laughter that followed her wherever she walked these dusty streets. And today had been no different as the banker's wife and her circle of friends had made their cruel remarks loud enough for half the town to hear. "Devil's hair," they called it. "Cursed by God himself," the preacher's daughter had whispered, though not quietly enough. Fiona had heard every word, felt every stare, endured every snicker since her family had arrived in Fort Worth 3 months ago from Missouri. Her father had believed Texas would offer them a fresh start, a chance to work their small plot of land without the constant judgment that had plagued them back home. But prejudice, it seemed, traveled faster than any wagon train. She hurried past the saloon, past the general store, keeping her eyes fixed on the ground as she always did. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat trickled down her spine beneath her modest calico dress. At 20 years old, Fiona had long since accepted that marriage was unlikely for a woman with hair like hers. The superstitions ran too deep, the old beliefs too strong. Red hair meant bad luck, meant a fiery temper, meant trouble for any man foolish enough to court such a woman. The sound of hooves on packed earth made her step aside, pressing herself against the wooden sidewalk railing as a group of riders passed. She didn't look up, didn't dare meet their eyes, but one of them slowed, and she could feel his gaze on her like a physical weight. "Miss," a deep voice said, and something in its tone made her glance up despite herself. The man sat astride a bay mare with the easy confidence of someone born to the saddle. He was perhaps 24 or 25, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. But it was his eyes that caught her, pale green like creek water, studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy, dusty chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a weathered hat that had seen better days. "You dropped this," he said, swinging down from his horse with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He held out a small handkerchief, embroidered with her initials, that must have fallen from her basket. Fiona reached for it quickly, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she pulled back as if burned. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Samuel Ortiz," he introduced himself, touching the brim of his hat. "I work at the Double R Ranch just north of town. Haven't seen you around before." "My family arrived in spring," Fiona said, still not quite meeting his eyes. "We have a small homestead east of here." "The old Patterson place." Samuel's voice held genuine interest. "That's good land. Needs work, but good land." Before Fiona could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Samuel Ortiz, you tell your boss that he still owes my husband for that seed corn." Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, stood on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, her expression sour. Then her gaze fell on Fiona, and her lip curled. "Oh, I see you've met our town's little curiosity." "Best be careful, Mr. Ortiz. That red hair is a mark of the devil. Everyone knows it brings misfortune." Fiona's cheeks flamed, and she started to turn away, to flee as she always did. But Samuel's next words stopped her cold. "Madam, with all due respect, I've never heard such nonsense in my life." His voice carried clearly, drawing the attention of passers-by. "My grandmother had hair just that color, and she was the finest woman I ever knew. Raised 6 children on her own after my grandfather died, built a successful ranch from nothing, and lived to see 82 years. If that's the devil's work, then the devil must be mighty fond of good people." The shock of his defense left Fiona speechless. No one had ever spoken up for her before, certainly not a stranger and definitely not in such a public way. Mrs. Henderson sputtered, her face turning an unbecoming shade of purple, but Samuel had already turned back to Fiona. "Would you allow me to walk you home, miss?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "It's getting late, and the road out to your place can be lonely." Fiona knew she should refuse, knew that accepting his kindness would only lead to more gossip, more cruel words. But something in his eyes, some warmth and sincerity she hadn't seen directed at her in longer than she could remember, made her nod. "Fiona Langley," she said softly, finally giving him her name. Samuel smiled, and it transformed his whole face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Well, Miss Langley, it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance." He took the heavy basket from her hands before she could protest, balancing it easily in one arm while leading his horse with the other. "I hope you don't mind walking slow." "My mare, Rosie here. She's been working all day and appreciates a gentle pace." They walked in silence for a few minutes, leaving the main street of Fort Worth behind. The town was growing, new buildings going up every month as more settlers arrived, but it still had that raw, unfinished quality of the frontier. Once they passed the last house, the landscape opened up into rolling prairie, dotted with mesquite trees and the occasional cluster of live oaks. "You didn't have to do that," Fiona said finally, her voice quiet. "Defend me, I mean. People will talk." "Let them talk," Samuel replied with a shrug. "I learned a long time ago that people who have nothing better to do than gossip about others aren't worth worrying about. Besides, I meant what I said. My grandmother, Rosa, she had hair like yours, beautiful like a sunset." Fiona felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "No one's ever called it beautiful before." Samuel glanced at her and something flickered in his green eyes. Then they were all fools. They continued walking, the silence between them more comfortable now. Fiona found herself stealing glances at him, noticing the way he moved, the strength in his hands, the kindness in his expression. He caught her looking once and smiled, not mocking or leering like some men, but with genuine warmth. "How long have you worked at the Double R?" she asked, partly to fill the silence and partly because she genuinely wanted to know more about him. 5 years now," Samuel said. "Came to Texas from New Mexico after my parents died. The ranch owner, Mr. Richardson, he gave me a chance when I had nothing. Started as a stable hand and worked my way up to foreman last year. It's honest work and I like the cattle, like being out on the range." "It must be hard work," Fiona observed. "It is," Samuel admitted. "Long days, especially during roundup and drives, but there's something about it that feels right, you know, like this is what I was meant to do." He paused, then added, "What about you? What do you do on your family's homestead?" "Everything," Fiona said with a small laugh. "We don't have much help, so it's just my father, my mother, and me. I tend the garden, care for the chickens and our milk cow, help with the planting and harvesting. My mother's not been well since we arrived. The journey was hard on her." "I'm sorry to hear that," Samuel said, his sympathy genuine. "Does she need a doctor? Doc Harris in town is a good man." "We've seen him," Fiona replied, her voice tight. "He says it's just exhaustion and the change in climate, that she needs rest and good food." What she didn't say was that they could barely afford the doctor's visit, let alone the medicine he'd recommended. They walked on, the sun sinking lower in the sky, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. The land around them was beautiful in its own harsh way, so different from the green hills of Missouri. Fiona had been learning to love it, this wild Texas country, even as it challenged everything she knew about farming and survival. "That's our place," she said after another mile, pointing to a small cluster of buildings in the distance. The house was modest, little more than a cabin really, with a barn that needed repairs and a chicken coop that leaned slightly to one side. But the fields around it were neat, the rows straight, evidence of her father's hard work. "Your father's doing well with the land," Samuel observed. "I can see that from here. Those are good straight furrows." "He works from dawn to dusk," Fiona said with pride. "We all do. We're determined to make this work." As they approached the house, the door opened and a man stepped out. William Langley was in his late 40s, weathered by years of outdoor work, with the same red hair as his daughter, though his was fading to gray at the temples. His expression was wary as he took in the sight of his daughter accompanied by a stranger. "Papa, this is Samuel Ortiz," Fiona said quickly. "He works as foreman at the Double R Ranch. He was kind enough to walk me home." William's expression softened slightly, though he remained cautious. "That's a fair distance out of your way, Mr. Ortiz." "Not so far," Samuel replied easily, handing the basket to Fiona. "And I was headed in this direction anyway. I wanted to check on the creek that runs through our north pasture, and it's just past your property." It was a transparent excuse, but William seemed to appreciate the politeness of it. "Well, we're obliged to you. Would you like to water your horse before you go? We have a good well." "That would be appreciated," Samuel said. Fiona led him to the well while her father disappeared back into the house. She drew up a bucket of cool water and poured it into a trough for Rosie, who drank gratefully. In the evening light, with the soft sounds of cicadas beginning their nightly chorus, there was an intimacy to the moment that made Fiona's heart race. "Thank you," she said again, looking up at Samuel, "for everything, for defending me, for walking me home, for being kind." Samuel stepped closer, and Fiona could smell leather and sage and something else, something that was uniquely him. "Fiona," he said, and her name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine despite the heat. "Would you think poorly of me if I said I'd like to call on you? Properly, I mean." "With your father's permission." Fiona's breath caught. "You can't mean that. You heard what Mrs. Henderson said. People will talk. They'll say terrible things about you for courting someone like me." "Someone like you," Samuel repeated, his voice intense. "You mean someone beautiful and hardworking and kind. Let them talk. I don't care about gossip, Fiona. I care about what I see right here in front of me, and what I see is a woman worth knowing." Tears pricked at Fiona's eyes. "You barely know me." "Then let me get to know you," Samuel said simply. "That's all I'm asking. A chance." Before Fiona could respond, the door to the house opened again and her mother appeared. Catherine Langley was a thin woman, worn down by illness and hardship, but her eyes were sharp and missed nothing. She took in the scene with a single glance. "Fiona, bring your young man inside," she called. "It's almost dark, and he shouldn't ride back to town on an empty stomach." "Mama, he's not," Fiona started, but Samuel was already moving toward the house. "Thank you kindly, madam," he said, "but I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition," Catherine insisted. "We don't have much, but what we have we share. Come in, come in." The interior of the house was clean and simply furnished. A table stood in the center of the main room, surrounded by mismatched chairs. A stone fireplace took up one wall, with a pot hanging over the fire that smelled of stew. It was humble, but it was clearly a home, with small touches that spoke of care and love. Over a simple meal of venison stew and cornbread, Samuel charmed Fiona's parents with stories of ranch life and respectful questions about their plans for the homestead. He listened with genuine interest as William described his hopes for the property, and he offered advice when asked, but didn't presume to know better. "The Double R has good breeding stock," Samuel said when William mentioned wanting to expand beyond crops. "Mr. Richardson might be willing to sell you a few head at a fair price. Cattle can be good income if you have the range for it." "I'll keep that in mind," William said, and Fiona could see he was impressed despite his initial wariness. When the meal was finished and the dishes cleared, Samuel thanked them again and prepared to leave. At the door, he caught Fiona's eye. "Saturday," he said quietly. "There's a dance in town. Would you allow me to escort you?" Fiona's heart leaped even as her mind screamed caution. "Samuel, I don't think. Let people see us together," Samuel continued. "Let them see that their gossip means nothing. You're not something to be ashamed of, Fiona. You're someone to be proud to stand beside." His words were so earnest, so sincere, that Fiona found herself nodding before she could think better of it. "All right. Yes." Samuel's smile lit up the twilight. "I'll come for you at 6. He mounted Rosie and touched his hat brim to her parents, who stood in the doorway. "Thank you again for your hospitality." They watched him ride away, his silhouette growing smaller against the darkening sky. When he was out of sight, Catherine turned to her daughter with raised eyebrows. "Well," she said, "he seems like a good man." "Mama, you know what people will say," Fiona protested weakly. "People always say something," Catherine replied with a shrug. "The question is, what does your heart say?" Fiona pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rapid beat beneath her palm. "It says yes," she whispered. "It says yes so loudly I can barely hear anything else." Catherine smiled and pulled her daughter into a gentle embrace. "Then listen to it, my girl. Lord knows life is too short to let fear and other people's small minds dictate your happiness." The days until Saturday passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Fiona threw herself into her work, tending the garden with extra vigor, scrubbing the house until it gleamed, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling into worry. What would people say when Samuel arrived to collect her? What would happen at the dance? Would the other girls refuse to speak to her? Would the men mock Samuel for his choice? But underneath the worry was something else, something bright and warm that grew stronger with each passing hour. Hope. For the first time in her life, someone had chosen her, had seen past the superstitions and cruelty to the person beneath. Samuel had called her beautiful. He had defended her publicly, and he had asked permission to court her. Friday evening, as Fiona was drawing water from the well, she heard horses approaching. Her first thought was that Samuel had come early, but as the riders drew closer, she recognized them as some of the local ranchers. They pulled up at the fence, and their expressions were not friendly. "Your father here," one of them called. His name was Jake Morrison, and he owned a spread west of town. "I'll fetch him," Fiona said, setting down her bucket and hurrying inside. William came out, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression wary. "Gentlemen, what can I do for you?" "We heard that Ortiz fellow from the Double R was sniffing around here," Morrison said bluntly. "Thought we should warn you. Man like that, he's got a reputation." Fiona's stomach dropped, but her father's expression remained calm. "What kind of reputation?" "He's Mexican," another man said, as if this explained everything. "Come up from New Mexico a few years back. Now, we don't have anything against Mexicans. You understand, but mixing with them, well, it causes problems." "Samuel Ortiz is the foreman at one of the largest ranches in the area," William said evenly. "From what I've seen, he's a hardworking, respectful young man. What exactly is your concern?" "Your daughter," Morrison said flatly. "People are talking Langley. Bad enough she's got that red hair without her taking up with a Mexican. You're new here, so maybe you don't understand how things work. But if you want to make a life in this town, you need to pay attention to what people think." Fiona felt her cheeks burning with shame and anger, but William's voice, when he spoke, was hard as iron. "My daughter is a grown woman, capable of making her own choices. And I'll thank you gentlemen to keep your opinions to yourselves unless you're asked for them, which you weren't." "You're making a mistake," Morrison warned. People won't forget this. Then they won't forget that you came onto my property uninvited to tell me how to run my family, William shot back. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do. The men left, but their visit cast a shadow over the evening. At dinner, Fiona picked at her food, her earlier excitement dimmed. "Papa, maybe Samuel and I shouldn't go to the dance," she said finally. "I don't want to cause problems for our family. We're already outsiders." "If we anger the other ranchers, no," William interrupted firmly. "We didn't come to Texas to hide who we are or to let others dictate our lives. If you like this young man and he treats you well, then you have my blessing. Let the others think what they will." "Your father's right," Catherine added. "We've spent too many years bowing to other people's prejudices. It ends here, Fiona. You deserve happiness, and if Samuel Ortiz is what makes you happy, then you hold your head high and take his arm proudly." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Saturday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures, a perfect evening for a dance. Fiona wore her best dress, a soft green calico that her mother had made for her 18th birthday. Catherine helped her arrange her hair, pulling it back from her face but letting the long red curls flow down her back. "You're beautiful," Catherine said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Let them all see it." When Samuel arrived precisely at 6, leading a small wagon borrowed from the ranch, his expression when he saw Fiona made her heart skip. He looked stunned, almost breathless, his green eyes wide. "You're beautiful," he said, echoing her mother's words. Then he seemed to remember himself and cleared his throat. "I mean, you look wonderful, Miss Langley." "Fiona," she corrected softly. "Please call me Fiona." "Fiona," he repeated, and again the sound of her name on his lips sent warmth spreading through her chest. The ride into Fort Worth was pleasant, the evening air cooling after the heat of the day. Samuel kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling her about his week, asking about hers, and Fiona found herself relaxing despite her nervousness about the dance. "I should warn you," Samuel said as they approached the town. "There might be some people who aren't happy to see us together. Not everyone in Fort Worth is as small-minded as Mrs. Henderson, but she's not alone either." "I know," Fiona said. "Some men came to our place yesterday. They warned my father about you." Samuel's jaw tightened. "What did they say?" "Does it matter?" Fiona asked. "My father sent them away. He and my mother have given us their blessing. That's what matters." Samuel reached over and took her hand, his larger one engulfing hers, warm and calloused and strong. "You're right. That is what matters." He paused, then added, "But Fiona, if this becomes too difficult, if the gossip or the judgment becomes too much, you need to tell me. I don't want to make your life harder." Fiona squeezed his hand. "You're not making it harder, you're making it better. For the first time in my life, someone sees me, really sees me. Do you know how that feels?" Samuel brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "I'm beginning to," he said softly. The dance was being held in the largest barn in Fort Worth, which had been swept clean and decorated with lanterns. Music spilled out into the night, fiddles and guitars creating a lively melody. People were gathered outside, talking and laughing, and Fiona felt a flutter of anxiety as heads turned their direction. Samuel helped her down from the wagon with careful courtesy, then offered his arm. "Ready?" Fiona took a deep breath and nodded. Together, they walked toward the barn. The reaction was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People stared openly. Fiona heard whispers, caught fragments of words. "Red hair," "Mexican," "shame." But Samuel kept walking, his head high, and Fiona matched his pace, refusing to look down or away. Inside the barn, the music continued, though Fiona noticed several of the musicians glancing their way. Samuel led her to the edge of the dance floor, and she saw Mrs. Henderson and her circle of friends clustered in one corner, their expressions ranging from shock to outrage. "Well," a voice said behind them, and Fiona turned to see Mr. Richardson, owner of the Double R Ranch. He was a large man in his 50s with a weathered face and shrewd eyes. "Samuel, you going to introduce me to your young lady?" "Mr. Richardson, this is Fiona Langley," Samuel said. "Her family has the old Patterson place. Fiona, this is my employer, Richard Richardson." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Langley," Richardson said, tipping his hat. "Your father's doing good work on that land. I rode past it last week and was impressed." He glanced around the barn, taking in the stares and whispers, then raised his voice slightly. "Samuel here is the best foreman I've ever had. Smart, hardworking, honest. Any young lady would be lucky to have his attention." It was a clear endorsement, and coming from one of the most powerful ranchers in the area, it carried weight. Fiona saw several people shift uncomfortably, and the whispers took on a different tone. "Thank you, sir," Samuel said, and Fiona could hear the gratitude in his voice. "Don't thank me for telling the truth," Richardson replied with a wave of his hand. "Now, I believe this is a dance. You two should dance." The current song ended and a new one began, slower and more melodic. Samuel turned to Fiona and bowed slightly. "May I have this dance?" Fiona's mouth was dry, but she nodded and placed her hand in his. He led her onto the floor, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers gently. They began to move, and despite her nervousness, Fiona found that Samuel was a good dancer, guiding her smoothly through the steps. "You're full of surprises," she said, looking up at him. "My grandmother insisted all her grandchildren learn to dance properly," Samuel explained with a small smile. "She said it was a sign of civilization." They moved together, and gradually Fiona became aware that other couples were joining them on the floor. Not everyone, but enough that they weren't alone. Some of the other ranch hands from the Double R, a few younger families from outlying homesteads. People who didn't care about gossip or who actively rejected it. As the evening wore on, Fiona found herself relaxing, even enjoying herself. Samuel introduced her to his friends from the ranch, all of whom treated her with courtesy and respect. They danced several more times, and between dances, they talked and laughed and shared stories. Samuel told her about learning to break horses, about the time a steer had chased him up a tree and left him stranded for 2 hours. Fiona told him about their journey from Missouri, about the challenges of adapting to Texas, about her dreams for their homestead. "I want to grow more than just food crops," she confided. "I want to have a real garden with flowers and herbs, maybe even sell them in town. My mother used to have a beautiful garden back in Missouri before she got sick. I want to create something like that here." "That's a good dream," Samuel said seriously. "Texas needs beauty, needs people who can see past the harshness to what could be." Around 10 o'clock, when the evening was winding down, they stepped outside for some fresh air. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. They walked a little way from the barn, to where the noise and light faded, and stood looking up at the sky. "Thank you for tonight," Fiona said softly. "For taking me, for dancing with me, for making me feel like I belong." Samuel turned to face her, his expression serious in the starlight. "Fiona, I need to tell you something. When I first saw you on that street, when I saw your red hair catching the sun, I thought you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Like a flame, bright and alive and impossible to look away from. And then, when you spoke, when I got to know you even a little, I realized that the beauty on the outside was nothing compared to what's inside you." Fiona's breath caught, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Samuel, let me finish," he said gently. "I know it's too soon to speak of serious things. We've known each other less than a week, but I need you to know that my intentions are honorable. I want to court you properly, with your parents' permission. I want to get to know everything about you. And if you'll let me, if time proves that what I feel now is real and lasting, I want to make you my wife someday." Tears spilled down Fiona's cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "People said I would never marry," she whispered, "that no man would want a woman with devil's hair." Samuel reached up and gently touched one of her curls, his fingers tangling in the soft strands. "You're a flame I'll never let die," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Don't you understand that? That hair, that beautiful red hair, it's not a curse. It's a gift. It's fire and passion and life. It's you, and you're everything I never knew I was looking for." Fiona rose on her toes and kissed him, a soft, tentative press of lips that sent heat flooding through her entire body. Samuel made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, deepening the kiss. It was nothing like the chaste pecks she'd seen between courting couples. It was fire and promise and the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I should get you home," he said reluctantly, "before your father thinks I've compromised you." "A little late for that," Fiona said with a breathless laugh, touching her swollen lips. The ride back to the homestead passed in a comfortable silence, Samuel's arm around Fiona's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, and felt a peace she'd never known before. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they faced, they would face them together. William was waiting on the porch when they arrived, smoking a pipe and watching the stars. He stood as Samuel helped Fiona down from the wagon. "Mr. Langley," Samuel said, approaching the porch, "I'd like to speak with you, if I may, about Fiona." William studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Come inside. Fiona, your mother left some coffee warming." The three of them sat around the table, Catherine joining them in her nightgown with a shawl around her shoulders. Samuel took a deep breath, clearly nervous but determined. "Mr. and Mrs. Langley, I want to formally ask permission to court your daughter. I know we've only just met, and I know there will be people who object for various reasons. But I can promise you that I'm a hard-working man with steady employment and good prospects. I own some land of my own, inherited from my grandparents, about 50 acres north of here near the Double R. It's not much yet, but it's a start. More importantly, I can promise you that I will treat Fiona with the respect and care she deserves. She's an extraordinary woman, and I count myself lucky to have met her." William exchanged a glance with Catherine, who nodded slightly. "Young man, I appreciate your honesty and your respectful approach, but I need to know something. Are you prepared for what courting my daughter will mean? For the gossip, the judgment, possibly even trouble from people who don't approve?" "Yes, sir," Samuel said without hesitation. "I won't pretend it will be easy, but some things are worth fighting for, and Fiona is one of them." "And you," William said, turning to his daughter. "Is this what you want?" Fiona looked at Samuel, at his earnest green eyes and strong, honest face, and felt her heart swell with certainty. "Yes, Papa, more than anything." William was quiet for another moment, then he smiled and extended his hand to Samuel. "Then you have our blessing. Court her properly, treat her well, and we'll have no objections." The relief on Samuel's face was palpable. He shook William's hand firmly, then Catherine's, and finally turned back to Fiona. "I should go. It's late and I need to be at the ranch early tomorrow, but may I come by next Sunday? After church, if you go. I thought we could take a ride, maybe have a picnic by the creek." "I'd like that," Fiona said, walking him to the door. On the porch, away from her parents' eyes, Samuel pulled her close once more and kissed her, a sweet, lingering kiss that promised many more to come. "Sweet dreams, Fiona," he murmured against her lips. "Sweet dreams, Samuel." She watched him ride away until she could no longer distinguish him from the darkness, then went inside to find her mother smiling at her with knowing eyes. "That's a good man," Catherine said. "Hold on to him." "I intend to," Fiona replied, and she went to bed that night with her heart full of hope and happiness, her fingers touching her lips where Samuel had kissed her. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Samuel came every Sunday, bringing small gifts. Wildflowers he'd picked on the range, a book of poetry he thought she'd enjoy, a beautiful hair comb carved from bone. They took long walks, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's hopes and dreams and fears. Samuel told her about growing up in New Mexico, about his parents who had died of fever when he was 19, about his beloved grandmother Rosa who had raised him after his mother's death in childbirth, and who had passed away just before he came to Texas. "She would have loved you," he said one Sunday as they sat by the creek that ran through the northern edge of the Langley property. "She always said that red hair was a sign of a passionate soul, someone who felt things deeply and wasn't afraid to fight for what they believed in." "I'm not sure I've ever fought for much," Fiona admitted. "Mostly I've just tried to hide and survive." "That's fighting too," Samuel said, taking her hand. "Fighting to survive, to keep going despite what people say, despite how they treat you. That takes strength, Fiona. More strength than most people realize." But their happiness wasn't without its challenges. The gossip continued, and while some people in Fort Worth were accepting or at least indifferent, others made their disapproval clear. Mrs. Henderson refused to serve Fiona at the Mercantile, forcing her to shop at the smaller general store on the edge of town. The preacher's wife made pointed comments about mixing races and maintaining proper social boundaries. And one night, someone threw rocks at the Langley house, shattering a window. William reported it to the sheriff, but nothing came of it. "Can't prove who did it," the lawman said with a shrug that suggested he didn't much care to try. Samuel was furious when he heard. "This has to stop. They can't just attack your family because they don't approve of us courting." "It's only a window," Fiona said, though her hands shook as she swept up the broken glass. "We can replace it." "It's not just a window," Samuel insisted. "It's intimidation. They're trying to scare you away from me." "Then they don't know me very well," Fiona said with a defiance that surprised even herself. "I'm not going anywhere, Samuel, not unless you want me to." Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Never, I'll never want that." As summer turned to fall, their relationship deepened. Samuel was everything Fiona had never dared dream of. Kind, respectful, passionate, and utterly devoted to her. He never tried to push her beyond what she was comfortable with, but the desire between them was palpable, simmering just beneath the surface of every touch, every kiss. One October evening, as they sat on the porch of the Langley house watching the sunset, Samuel said quietly, "I've been saving money. For a house on my land. I want to start building in the spring." Fiona's heart leaped, understanding the implication. A house. Samuel turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "A house for us, if you'll have me. Fiona, I know we've only been courting for a few months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your strength, your kindness, your beautiful red hair that catches fire in the sunset. I love the way you laugh, the way you care for your parents, the way you dream of gardens and beauty in this harsh land. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that every single day." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple silver with a small turquoise stone. "This was my grandmother's. She gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to the woman who set my heart on fire. Fiona Langley, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Fiona's face as she nodded. "Yes," Yes, Samuel, of course, yes. I love you too. I think I've loved you since that first day when you defended me on the street, when you saw me as a person and not a curse. Samuel slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her with a hunger that had been building for months, and Fiona responded with equal fervor, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, her body pressed against his. They pulled apart, breathing hard, and Samuel rested his forehead against hers. I should ask your father's permission properly. He'll say yes, Fiona said with certainty. He likes you. They both do, and she was right. William and Catherine were delighted, though William did insist on a proper engagement period. Spring wedding, he said firmly. That gives Samuel time to build his house and you time to prepare. I know you young people are eager, but there's no need to rush into things. Samuel agreed readily, and they set the date for April when the wildflowers would be blooming and the weather would be perfect. The news spread quickly through Fort Worth, generating a fresh wave of gossip, but also something else. A growing acceptance among some of the townspeople. Mr. Richardson made it clear that he would be attending the wedding, and that any of his ranch hands who wanted to could take the day off to do the same. The owner of the general store, a kind older man named Mr. Perkins, offered to order in anything Fiona needed for the wedding at cost. You're good people, he said simply when Fiona tried to thank him. You and that young man of yours, don't let the small-minded folks get you down. The winter passed in a flurry of preparations. Samuel spent every spare moment working on their house, enlisting the help of his friends from the ranch. It was modest but well built, 2 rooms with the potential to add more later, a solid roof, and a stone fireplace. Fiona started collecting items for their household: dishes, linens, cooking pots. Catherine, whose health had improved with the cooler weather, helped her daughter sew a wedding dress from white muslin, simple but beautiful. Christmas came, and Samuel spent it with the Langleys, bringing a small tree he'd cut from the ranch and presents for everyone. For Fiona, he'd commissioned a beautiful wooden box carved with roses to hold her precious things. She gave him a quilt she'd been secretly making, each square embroidered with symbols of their relationship: a flame for her hair, a horse for Rosie, a house for their future. It's perfect, Samuel said, running his hands over the careful stitching. You're perfect. By March, the house was finished, and Fiona went with Samuel to see it for the first time. She walked through the rooms, imagining their life together here, and felt tears of joy prick her eyes. It was everything she'd dreamed of: a home of her own, a place where she would be loved and valued, where her red hair would be seen as a mark of beauty rather than curse. I love it, she said, turning to Samuel. I love it, and I love you, and I can't wait to be your wife. Samuel pulled her close, kissing her deeply. One more month, he murmured against her lips. One more month, and then you'll be Fiona Ortiz, and nothing will ever separate us. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the sky a brilliant blue and the air filled with the scent of wildflowers. Fiona dressed in her mother's room, her hands shaking as Catherine helped her with the buttons on her dress. You're going to be so happy, Catherine said, tears running down her own cheeks. I can feel it, Fiona. You and Samuel, you're meant to be together. The ceremony was held outside, in a meadow near the creek where Fiona and Samuel had spent so many Sunday afternoons. Chairs had been set up for guests, and to Fiona's surprise, quite a few people had come. The ranch hands from the Double R, of course, and Mr. Richardson with his wife. Mr. Perkins from the general store. Several of the younger families from surrounding homesteads. Even Doc Harris was there, smiling benevolently. Mrs. Henderson and her circle were notably absent, but Fiona didn't care. She had the people who mattered, the people who saw past superstition and prejudice to the truth of love. The preacher from Fort Worth had refused to perform the ceremony, but they'd found a traveling minister who was happy to officiate. He was an older man with kind eyes, and he spoke of love and commitment and building a life together. When Fiona walked toward Samuel on her father's arm, she saw his eyes widen with awe. She knew she looked beautiful, her red hair loose and crowned with wildflowers, her white dress simple but elegant. But it was the look in Samuel's eyes that made her feel truly radiant, pure, undiluted love. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, and Fiona listened in a daze as he spoke the traditional words. Then it was time for their vows, and Samuel took her hands, his voice strong and clear. "Fiona, I vow to love you every day for the rest of my life, to honor you, protect you, and cherish you. To see you always as you truly are, beautiful, strong, and perfect. You're a flame I'll never let die, a light in my darkness, and I promise to spend every moment showing you how much you mean to me." Fiona could barely see him through her tears as she spoke her own vows. "Samuel, I vow to love you with all my heart, to stand beside you through every challenge, to build a life with you, to be your partner in all things. You saw me when no one else did, and you loved me when I thought I was unlovable. I promise to give you that same gift every day of our lives." The minister smiled and pronounced them husband and wife, and Samuel pulled Fiona into a kiss that drew cheers and applause from their guests. It was perfect, absolutely perfect, and as they turned to face their friends and family, Fiona felt a joy so complete it was almost painful. The celebration afterward was simple but heartfelt. Tables had been set up with food that people had brought: roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from early gardens, and a beautiful cake that Mr. Perkins' wife had baked. There was music and dancing, and Fiona danced with Samuel over and over, never wanting to leave his arms. As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and rode to their new home, Samuel's arm around Fiona as she leaned against him, exhausted but blissfully happy. Inside the house, Samuel lit lanterns, casting a warm golden glow over the simple furniture. He turned to Fiona, his expression suddenly uncertain. "I know this isn't a fancy place," he said, "not like some of the houses in town," but Fiona stopped him with a kiss. "It's perfect. It's ours." She stepped back and slowly began unbuttoning her dress, her fingers trembling but sure. Samuel watched, his eyes darkening with desire as she let the white fabric pool at her feet. She stood before him in her chemise, feeling vulnerable but not afraid. "Fiona," Samuel breathed, his voice rough. "You're so beautiful." He crossed to her in 2 strides and swept her into his arms, carrying her to their bed. The night that followed was a revelation of passion and tenderness, Samuel showing her with hands and lips and body just how much he loved her. Fiona gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, and found a pleasure she'd never imagined possible. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Samuel traced patterns on her bare shoulder and whispered, "I love you, Fiona Ortiz." "I love you too," she murmured, already half asleep. "My husband." The first months of marriage were a period of adjustment and joy. Fiona learned to manage their household, to cook for 2, to do laundry and mending, and all the tasks that filled a woman's days. But Samuel never expected her to do it all alone. He helped with dishes, chopped wood without being asked, and on Sundays they worked together in the garden Fiona had started, planting vegetables and the flowers she loved. Samuel continued working at the Double R, but he was also building up their own small herd of cattle, using money he'd saved and some animals Mr. Richardson had sold him at a generous price. The work was hard, but they were building something together, a life and a legacy. In town, the gossip gradually faded. People got used to seeing Samuel and Fiona together, got used to the idea of their marriage. Some still disapproved, but others came to respect them for their hard work and obvious devotion to each other. Mrs. Henderson never did soften, but Fiona found she didn't care. She had Samuel, she had her parents nearby, and she had a home filled with love. By summer, Fiona suspected she was pregnant. She waited to be certain before telling Samuel, and when she finally did, his reaction made her laugh with delight. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy, then set her down quickly, worried he'd hurt her. "A baby," he kept saying, his hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Fiona, we're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see he was. "Happy. I'm beyond happy. I don't even have words." He kissed her tenderly. "You're giving me everything I've ever wanted. A home, a family, a life filled with love. How did I get so lucky?" "We both did," Fiona said, touching his cheek. "We found each other when we both needed it most." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite Fiona's initial worries. Catherine was delighted to be expecting a grandchild, and she came over often to help as Fiona grew larger and more uncomfortable. Samuel was attentive to the point of being overprotective, insisting she rest more, refusing to let her lift anything heavy. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Fiona protested, but she secretly loved his concern. In February of 1880, on a cold but clear night, Fiona went into labor. Samuel rode like a madman to fetch Doc Harris and Catherine, and then paced the small house like a caged animal while the women worked. Hours later, when the sun was just beginning to rise, a baby's cry split the air. Catherine emerged from the bedroom, her face tired but beaming. "You have a son, Samuel. A healthy baby boy." Samuel nearly fell over in his rush to get to the bedroom. Fiona lay propped up on pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in the quilt she'd made. She looked up as Samuel entered, and her smile was incandescent. "Meet your son," she said softly. Samuel approached slowly, as if in a dream, and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had dark hair like his and a red, scrunched-up face. As Samuel watched, tiny eyes blinked open, revealing a blue-gray color that would probably change in the coming weeks. "He's perfect," Samuel whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Fiona, he's absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Fiona asked. They discussed names before, but now, looking at their son, Samuel said, "Thomas. After your father's middle name, Thomas William Ortiz." "Thomas," Fiona repeated, testing it. "Tommy. Yes, I like that." Little Tommy thrived, growing from a tiny newborn into a chubby, happy baby. He had his mother's red hair, which began to show as the dark infant hair fell out and was replaced by bright copper fuzz. Samuel declared it the most beautiful hair he'd ever seen after his wife's, and he spent hours just watching his son, marveling at the miracle of him. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier now with a baby to care for but no less happy. Samuel was promoted to ranch manager at the Double R, overseeing not just the Cowboys but the entire operation. It came with a substantial raise in pay, which they used to expand their house, adding 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen. The garden Fiona had dreamed of became reality, a beautiful space filled with flowers and herbs. She started selling bouquets and medicinal plants in town, and they sold well enough that it became a steady source of additional income. 2 years after Tommy was born, Fiona gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rosa Catherine, after Samuel's grandmother and Fiona's mother. Rosa had her father's dark hair and eyes but her mother's fair skin, a beautiful combination. Tommy adored his little sister, and Samuel often came home to find his son gently rocking Rosa's cradle or singing to her in the nonsense language of toddlers. By 1885, they had 4 children: Tommy, Rosa, another boy named James, and a baby girl named Margaret. The house rang with laughter and noise, and while life was busy and often chaotic, Fiona couldn't imagine being happier. One evening, as she and Samuel sat on their porch watching the sun set while the children played in the yard, Samuel took her hand. "You remember that first day?" he asked. "When you dropped your handkerchief?" "Of course," Fiona said. "I remember everything about that day. Mrs. Henderson calling me cursed, you defending me, the way my heart raced when you looked at me." "I knew right then," Samuel said. "I knew you were going to change my life. I just didn't realize how much." Fiona squeezed his hand. "Did you ever imagine this? Us here with 4 children and a life we've built together?" "I hoped for it," Samuel admitted. "But hoping and having are very different things. You gave me everything, Fiona. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose beyond just working and surviving. You gave me love." "We gave each other those things," Fiona corrected gently. She touched her red hair, still long and lustrous even after 4 children. "And you made me see that what I thought was a curse was really a gift. You called me a flame, and you kept that promise. You never let that flame die." Samuel pulled her close and kissed her, a sweet kiss that still held the passion of their early days. "Never," he promised. "I'll tend that flame for the rest of my life." As the years passed, the Ortiz family became a fixture in Fort Worth. Their children grew strong and healthy, accepted by the community in a way that wouldn't have been possible a decade earlier. Tommy showed a talent for working with horses and began helping at the ranch when he was just 10. Rosa had her mother's gift for growing things and spent hours in the garden. James was the scholar of the family, always with a book in his hands, and little Margaret was fearless, climbing trees and racing her brothers. Samuel eventually bought the Double R Ranch when Mr. Richardson decided to retire. It was a huge undertaking, but with the success of their cattle operation and Fiona's thriving garden business, they could manage it. They moved into the larger ranch house but kept their original home, which Samuel insisted on maintaining. "That's where we started," he said. "Where Tommy was born, where we first learned to be a family. We should keep it, pass it down to one of our children someday." Catherine Langley lived to see all 4 of her grandchildren grown and married, passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72. William followed 2 years later. They were buried on the Langley homestead, which Tommy and his wife eventually took over, keeping the land in the family. Fiona's red hair became streaked with silver as she aged, but Samuel still called it beautiful. He would touch it reverently, running his fingers through the long strands, and tell her she was just as stunning as the day he first saw her. More so, he'd insist when she laughed at him. "Because now I know you, every part of you, and that makes you even more beautiful." They had 10 grandchildren eventually, scattered across various ranches and homesteads in the Fort Worth area. The Ortiz name became associated with integrity, hard work, and kindness. People forgot, or at least stopped mentioning, the gossip and prejudice that had marked Fiona and Samuel's early courtship. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party, a huge celebration with seemingly half of Fort Worth in attendance. There was food and music and dancing, and Fiona and Samuel danced together just as they had at that first town dance, his arm around her waist, her hand in his. "Still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," Samuel murmured in her ear. "And you're still the man who saved me," Fiona replied. "Who saw past what everyone else saw to who I really was." "No," Samuel corrected gently. "You saved yourself. You were always strong, always beautiful, always worthy. I just had the sense to recognize it." They danced until late into the evening, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, by friends and neighbors, by the life they'd built together against all odds. Samuel Ortiz lived to the age of 78, passing away peacefully with Fiona holding his hand. His last words were, "Still burning bright, my flame, still so bright." Fiona lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still tending her beloved garden even in her 80s. She never remarried, telling people that she'd had her great love and one was enough for any lifetime. When she passed, she was buried beside Samuel on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a headstone that read, "Fiona Langley Ortiz, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, a flame that never died." But the story of Fiona and Samuel lived on, passed down through generations of the Ortiz family. The story of a woman with red hair who was mocked and scorned until a cowboy saw her true beauty. The story of a man who defied prejudice and convention to claim the woman he loved. The story of two people who built a life together based on love, respect, and the unwavering belief that some flames are meant to burn forever. Their original house still stood on the ranch land, maintained by their descendants as a reminder of where it all began. And on the mantel in that house sat a faded photograph from their 30th anniversary, showing an older couple dancing together, their faces lit with joy and love. Fiona's red and silver hair caught the light in the photograph, still vibrant even then, and Samuel gazed at her with an expression of such devotion that anyone looking at it could see the truth. Some loves are ordinary. Some are forgettable. But some, rare and precious, burn like wildfire across the years, changing everything they touch and leaving a legacy that echoes through generations. The love of Samuel Ortiz and Fiona Langley was one of those flames, a beacon of hope in a hard land, proof that seeing someone truly, loving them completely, can transform not just two lives but an entire community. And in Fort Worth, Texas, where their story began on a dusty street in 1878, people still tell the tale. About the red-haired woman and the cowboy who loved her. About the flame that never died. Because some promises, when made with a true heart, are kept forever.